Shall move to questions without notice. Are there any questions? Give the call to the Honourable the Leader of the Opposition.
Yeah. Prime Minister, last year the Treasurer told us he had beaten inflation. Yet even before the fuel crisis, inflation had beaten the Treasurer. And now the Minister for Energy has been caught unprepared for Australia's energy shortages, further punishing Australian households at the Bowser and at the supermarket. Will the Prime Minister confirm that Australia's living standards have fallen under Labor?
Call to the order. Member for Herbert. When the House comes to order, give the call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition appears to want to just completely dismiss the fact that there is a war going on.
Let's pretend it's not happening. You an ostrich or something?
Order. The Prime Minister is 10 seconds into an answer. He said about 5 words. Just ask the House to return to order so we can hear the Prime Minister.
And the conflict in the Middle East impacts the region. It also impacts the global economy. Australia is not immune to that, and Australians are concerned. Our government's dealing with it in an orderly, constructive way. And those opposite continue to want to pretend that none of that is happening. But actually, what we have done, of course, is put Australia in a much stronger position to respond to these difficult issues. The best.
6.1%, you fool.
Order. No, we're not going to have the Treasurer and the Leader of the Opposition bantering. The Prime Minister is giving information to the House about a pretty important issue. So we're just going to ask the House to settle, to reset, so the Prime Minister can be heard with respect.
And at a time like this, what we're doing is working with industry, and indeed the President of the National Farmers Federation said, now is the time for calm, considered and sensible actions. Don't panic buy. He's been very clear about that. And it stands in stark contrast to the behaviour of those opposite. I would have thought that the last few months might have taught the Liberal Party and the Coalition that trying to turn everything into a political opportunity doesn't end well. It didn't end well for the former leader of the Liberal Party. It didn't end well for the former leader of the National Party. The surest...
Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the Manager.
Goes to direct relevance, Speaker. This is serious. He was asked about a very serious issue. He wasn't asked about policies on our side. He was asked about what the government is.
I think it would be fair to say this question is quite loaded with the commentary that the Leader of the Opposition mentioned at the beginning part of the question. It wasn't a straightforward, please provide an answer sort of question. So if there is quite a lot of politics in the question, there's going to be quite a lot of politics in the answer. Order. He's laughing there. The Prime Minister in continuation.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I would have thought that they would have learnt something, but apparently not. Everything, no matter how big an issue is, they show how small they are and how small their vision is.
Blow every issue up.
Right now, it is a fact that we have as much fuel coming through our ports now as we did before the war began. As simple as that. And for the opposition to whip up panic about this does not serve Australians. It only lets people off who want to rip people off at this time. You know, they come in here and they practice. They practice how can we divide, how can we create a political advantage out of what is a difficult situation that the Australian government is dealing with. From a bloke who thought that the fuel reserves for Australia should be kept in Texas.
Called order. Give a call to the honourable order when the Leader of the Opposition ceases. When the House comes to order, we'll now hear from the honourable member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Can the Prime Minister update the House on flooding events and extreme weather affecting communities in parts of the Northern Territory and Queensland, and how is the Commonwealth working with the Northern Territory and Queensland governments to provide assistance to Australians impacted?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. We on this side of the House are focused on the issues that Australians are facing. And one of those is, of course—
Order. Members on my left.
One of those is, of course, the floods, and the interjections says it all about those opposite and their focus. Not all the LNP are like this, though, Mr Speaker. I spoke this morning and had contact yesterday with the Premier, David Crisafulli, who was visiting Bundaberg. Bundaberg residents are under immediate threat of flood, and floodwaters are impacting the wide Bay region and will do for several days. We say to the people of those electorates, prioritise your safety and the safety of loved ones. Follow advice about warnings. Remember, if it's flooded, forget it. In Northern Territory as well, a large monsoon trough remains over the Big Rivers region. Minister McCarthy has visited evacuation centres in Katherine, including the evacuation centre at Katherine High. And I hear from the Minister that the principal there, Nick Lovering, spent 77 hours straight on duty at the school, supporting his community. That is the sort of thing that we see, that at the worst of times we see the best of the Australian character, and that's a good thing. The Commonwealth is, of course, providing assistance wherever we can. In the Northern Territory, we've deployed staff through NEMA who are active on the ground coordinating assistance, including with evacuations. The Commonwealth and Northern Territory governments have activated joint disaster recovery funding in Katherine. That includes support for clean-up efforts, immediate relief payments and short-term accommodation payments. We're in regular contact with the Northern Territory and Queensland governments, and as always, we stand ready to respond to any further requests for help. This will be a hard time for Australians who are facing these threats, the aftermath of flooding and the uncertainty of the weather over the next few days. Every level of government will keep working together to help those affected get through this time, through the clean-up and through the recovery.
Call to the honourable member for Goldstein. The member for Chipley will leave the chamber under 94 hours.
Right.
Order. We're not having people interject as they approach the dispatch box. Order. The Minister for Infrastructure will follow the member for Chipley if she's not careful. Order. People need to be able to ask their questions in silence. Member for Goldstein has the call.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. After 13 interest rate rises under Labor, the average Australian mortgage holder is paying more than $23,000 a year in interest than when the Coalition left office. With National Australia Bank now predicting the 14th rate rise under Labor next week and the 15th when they meet again in May, will the Treasurer apologise to struggling mortgage holders for the pressures he is imposing on them?
Call to the Treasurer.
I wondered if he was still here, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to learn that he is. He's got a lot of nerve asking about interest rates when only a couple of days into his pretty disastrous stint as Shadow Treasurer, he called for the end of the Reserve Bank's dual mandate. That's right. And when he called for the end of the Reserve Bank's dual mandate, what he was calling for was higher interest rates and higher unemployment. That's right. And he made that call, Mr Speaker, within only a matter of days of being appointed the Shadow Treasurer. Now, even by the standards of this Shadow Treasurer, that is a pretty appalling stuff-up, Mr Speaker, even by his standards. And so if he wants to ask me about interest rates, then he should fess up and tell the Australian people he wants higher interest rates and higher unemployment at the same time, because that would be the effect.
I think the Treasurer was just saying if he wants to ask me a question about interest rates. So it's going to be difficult, like we've done before, on a point of order, but I'll give the member for Goldstein a fair go.
Point of order. It's a minute relevance. We're now a minute into the answer, Speaker, and he hasn't addressed the subject matter.
Well, no, that's not a reason to be out of order. I know, yes, but that's not the point of that point of order. He's got 3 minutes to answer your question. So that if he talks about something now, you won't be able to get up and ask about relevance. Just because he hasn't answered a question in a minute, it's not really the point of that point of order. So it's about explaining if he was talking about something else. The Treasurer is getting up and saying, if he asks me a question about interest rates and he's answering it, it's hard to use that point of order. You get it? Good. Give the call to the Treasurer.
So, Mr Speaker, that would be the effect of the Shadow Treasurer's call becoming a reality, higher interest rates and higher unemployment. Second point that I would make, Mr Speaker, is that no responsible Treasurer comments on or feeds speculation about future movements in interest rates. There are good reasons why Treasurers don't do that, if only the Shadow Treasurer was as responsible to stick to the convention which has applied to economic spokespeople from both sides of the parliament over a long period of time. The third thing I would say, Mr Speaker, is he has conveniently left out from his question the fact that in the course of the last year we also saw 3 interest rate cuts. Now, when interest rates were coming down, I don't remember the Shadow Treasurer saying it was all about the government. When interest rates were coming down. So, Mr Speaker, I respect the independence of the Reserve Bank. And that extends to not commenting on the future movement in rates. I also think that the Reserve Bank's dual mandate is very important because it means that the Reserve Bank is focused on jobs, the impact on real people in real communities at the same time as they engage in this fight against inflation. Now, when it comes to inflation, I have acknowledged on a number of occasions we had an inflation challenge before the escalation of the conflict in the Middle East, but the escalation of the conflict in the Middle East, as the Prime Minister has pointed out earlier in question time, makes that challenge harder rather than easier. And when it comes to fighting inflation, those opposite had it north of 6% and rising. We've had it much lower. We know that it's still a challenge in our economy, and that's why we're focused on it.
Call to the honourable member for Deakin.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Home Affairs. What action has the Albanese Labor government taken to support the women from the Iranian women's soccer team?
Give a call to the Minister for Home Affairs and the Leader of the House.
Thanks very much, Speaker. I want to thank the member for Deakin for the question, for acknowledge his advocacy for the Iranian Australian community in his electorate, and also acknowledge the support of all members of the House in solidarity, in particular with the Iranian women's soccer team. Last night I travelled to Brisbane and Sydney to make sure that if anybody from the team were considering wanting to take up the government's offer to remain in Australia, that I was able to meet with them and that they weren't in a situation where officials had to answer some of their questions by saying that's a matter for the Minister, that I would be there in person to be able to answer those questions. Before I left, 2 people from the team, one team member and one support person, had made contact with my officials saying that they did want to stay in Australia. At that point they were separated from the rest of the group, and when I arrived at Brisbane Airport they'd been taken to the AFP Centre, which is not far from there, to be able to meet with me. I took them through what their options were. They both indicated that they would like to stay in Australia. and I told them on behalf of all of us that they would be safe here, they were welcome here and they would be at home here, and issued them with humanitarian visas. I then travelled to Sydney. While I travelled to Sydney, those two were reunited with the other 5 who'd already made that decision. When I travelled to Sydney, and we would have seen the scenes as the team was being moved towards an international flight, we wanted to make sure that every individual had a chance to talk to my officials without anyone else from the group with them. So there was a small number of people who we had no intention of making an offer to. For the remaining people, we took them individually. If they wanted to contact family, they could contact family. We made sure, and that did happen. And there was actually some assistance with phone numbers across the aisle, which I want to acknowledge as well. Nobody in Sydney took up that offer, but importantly, all of them had the situation without the pressure of other people watching them to be able to make that decision. Now, I'm not naive. Nothing we did could take away the pressure of the context in which they were making that decision. Today, shortly after 10 o'clock, I was advised that one of the 2 who had made the decision to stay last night had spoken to some of the teammates who had left and had changed her mind. In Australia, people are able to change their mind, people are able to travel. And so we respect the context in which she has made that decision. Unfortunately, in making that decision, she'd been advised by her teammates and coach to contact the Iranian embassy and to get collected. My officials made sure that this was her decision, and every question you would want asked was asked. As a result of that, it meant that the Iranian embassy now knew the location of where everybody was. I immediately gave the instruction for people to be moved, and that's been dealt with immediately. Can I simply say, and I know I'm out of time, but can I simply say that for every member of this delegation, they have been shown a respect by Australia that would be unfamiliar to them in Iran. They have been shown a country that is willing to say the choice is yours. And I think we can all be very proud of the Australian Federal Police, of my Home Affairs officials, of everybody who's been involved in this, to make sure that Australia is a country where they can see there is freedom of choice for women as well, and a country where those who have made the decision to stay will be very welcome, and very much the rest of the Australian people will be wrapping them in our arms.
Associate his remarks to support the Minister, the Leader of the Opposition.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Speaker. I do associate the opposition with the remarks made by the Minister. I support the decisions and the work of the Minister on this important issue. As I said yesterday, these women have captured the hearts of so many Australians with the stand they have taken against a despotic regime, and it's been an incredibly difficult time for them. And I thank the Minister for the work he's done. As you know, as the Minister knows, there are a number on this side of the House who have been working hard to try to achieve this outcome as well. And I do wish all the soccer players, whatever their choice was, the very, very best.
Before we move to the member for Mayo, I'm pleased to advise in the Northern Gallery today is Councillor Matt Burnett, the Mayor of Gladstone and the National President of the Australian Local Government Association. Give the call to the honourable member for Mayo.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Energy. There's a run on fuel across Mayo. Despite fuel distributors working around the clock, many service stations are needing to restrict sales. Demand is expected to further increase as vintage steps up for our grape growers. What action is the government taking to stabilise domestic supply chains in regional communities like Mayo so that we're not left with empty bowsers?
Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for her question and the spirit in which she asked it. And she is right, of course. She is right, of course. Across regional Australia, we are seeing real pressures on the supply chain as demand has increased. And I can tell the honourable member that demand in the Adelaide terminal has increased 139%, for example, and that is putting pressure on supply chains. It is important, Mr Speaker, for all honourable members, I think, to be clear with Australians that supplies to Australia continue strongly and that we continue to have our minimum stock obligation, which has not been accessed. In addition, Mr Speaker, I can say to the House, in direct answer to the honourable member, the Treasurer and I have worked closely together today to ensure that we are working with the industry that any necessary ACCC exemptions are granted. An independent matter for the ACCC, of course, but we are working to facilitate that conversation with the ACCC, which would allow the companies to ensure that they are working together appropriately, not inappropriately, but appropriately to ensure supplies to regional areas. We have also, the Treasurer and I, worked together to announce the doubling of penalties for false and misleading conduct and cartel behaviour to a maximum of $100 million per offence. And we're asking the ACCC to ramp up fuel price monitoring to reporting weekly with a focus on unusual price spikes. In addition, Mr Speaker, I've asked the Secretary of my department over the last 24 hours to exercise the powers available to him under Section 13E of the Petroleum and Other Fuels Reporting Act to seek additional information about supply and demand at the fuel distribution terminals around Australia. I've asked the Secretary, of course, to balance carefully the compliance burden on small business, which I would have thought honourable members opposite would have thought of as well, to ensure that any changes that are made balance the needs for improved information at the regional level with any compliance burden on small business. In addition, today, Mr Speaker, I've spoken to a number of CEOs of fuel companies, both large and distribution and small and service stations. They've advised me that supply continues to flow, as would be expected. I can tell the House that ships continue to arrive in Australia, but they are experiencing those localised disruptions because of that very elevated demand, and we'll continue to work with them in the terms which I've outlined.
Give the call to the member for Bendigo.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestries. How is the Albanese Labor government working closely with Australian farmers and producers to support them during the conflict in the Middle East?
Give the call to the Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries and Forestry.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I do want to thank our terrific member for Bendigo, and I know she's got some fine farmers and producers in her electorate, and it was great to be with her just a few weeks ago to meet with many of them. And Mr Speaker, our government does understand the importance of keeping our farmers farming during this difficult time. We know that every community across Australia, and indeed countries across the globe, including our near neighbours, rely on our world-class food and fibre. We're working day and night, as I said yesterday, with our farmers and producers to assist them with the immediate challenges from the current conflict in the Middle East, which we continue to monitor. Of course, front of mind for our farmers and producers right now at this point in time is the supply of fuel and fertiliser, which underpins everything they do, including, of course, our food production. We do know that demand for fuel in some parts of the country is higher than normal, as the Minister for Energy has indicated, including particularly in our regional and rural communities. And we're hearing from our farmers, our producers and indeed our fishers that there are some challenges right now, which is what the Minister outlined and how we're responding. It's also why our government yesterday held the round table with the National Farmers Federation, Fertiliser Australia, the Australian Institute of Petroleum and the Australian Trucking Association. And we all reaffirmed yesterday that this conflict in the Middle East is not and should not be an opportunity for commercial opportunity for people. We discussed yesterday the importance of the fuel industry, delivering fuel across our economy, including to our regions, which the Minister has outlined the actions that we are taking. After this meeting yesterday, the President of the National Farmers Federation, Hamish McIntyre, said, and I quote, "Now is the time for calm, considered and sensible actions." In fact, the former leader of the Nationals, rightly backed this message on Monday on Sky, where he said, and I quote, "The big message for every Australian is don't panic. The supplies are there." Regrettably, Mr Speaker, not everybody is getting the message. There is a responsibility on all of us in this place to act in the national interest, and I call on everybody to do that. All of us in this place need to reassure all Australians that fuel is continuing to arrive in Australia in normal volumes. People should go about their usual business in their usual way with confidence, Mr Speaker. The fuel supply coming into the country is in addition to the strategic fuel reserve that has not yet been drawn on. And let me be very clear about that. That reserve is larger than what we had when those opposite were in government. And on fertiliser, Mr Speaker, for the upcoming planting season, the fertiliser that is required is already on the water or in the country. And that is the advice that we are receiving clearly, that the fertiliser is already on the water or in the country. Mr Speaker, on this side of the House, we're going to continue to work with our farmers, our primary producers and our fishers in the national interest, and I call on everybody else in this place to do the same.
Call to the honourable member for Durack.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Minister, yesterday you insisted that there is no fuel supply shortage. Today, on the front page of the Australian Financial Review, West Australian farmer Nick Immon said, and I quote, "The Minister for Climate Change and Energy was saying there's still no issues, and the next phone call I get is from our fuel supply saying there's no orders available." End quote. Minister, why are Australians like Nick running out of fuel?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Not only did I say and do I say that Australia's fuel supply is secure, every honourable member should say that, Mr Speaker, because that's the truth. Because that's the truth, and that's the responsible truth to tell the Australian people. The responsible truth to tell the Australian people is that we continue to receive fuel supplies as expected. In the last 10 days, Mr Speaker, fuel supplies have arrived in Australia in Townsville, in Brisbane, in Cairns, in Broome, in Geelong, Gore Bay, Kwinana, Gladstone and Mackay. Mr Speaker, those fuel supplies have been coming in as expected. At least 16 vessels have already arrived this month, and there are many more on the way, with 25 to 30 more vessels expected this month. And the chief executives I've spoken to today have told me that there are no indications that that fuel won't arrive. In addition, Mr Speaker, we have the minimum stock obligation fuel supplies, which, contrary to what the Deputy Premier of Queensland so irresponsibly told Queenslanders and Australians yesterday, have not been accessed and are still there to be called upon if and when necessary. So it is the responsible thing to do to say to Australians that our fuel supplies are secure. At the same time, we have acknowledged that we are facing supply chain issues in regional Australia in particular, and that we've seen demand for the Perth terminal, for example, increase by 165%. That is now, Mr Speaker, regardless of who is in office, regardless of what petrol companies are doing, that will put pressure on. And we should be honest about that. That will put pressure on supply, and we will see localised shortages, and we are. But we should also reassure Australians that industry and government working together can ensure that the supply of fuel to Australians is secure, and there is no need for panic buying. And we've paid our thanks to the member for Maranoa, who has said something very similar, and he has behaved responsibly. Not every honourable member opposite has taken the same approach. And when honourable members opposite question whether Australia's supply of fuel is secure, they are undermining the national interest. They are undermining the national interest, Mr Speaker, because our fuel supply is secure.
You're trying to make it worse.
The Minister's going to pause so the manager can take his point of order.
It's to direct relevance, Speaker. The Minister was asked why are Australians like Nick running out of fuel. I'd like you to come back and answer that question.
Well, the Minister has been providing a lot of information regarding that direct question that he was asked, including the amount of fuel, the terminals, where it's order. You want me to deal with a point of order? It's not going to help the point of order if everyone's yelling at me. If he's providing that direct information about how much, where it's come, and I've listened carefully to what he says, he is being directly relevant. So maybe you want more information. I can't make him provide more information to you. Wish I could, but I don't have that magic power. I can only have the power that the standing orders allow me. So he is being directly relevant, and I'm going to ask him to remain directly relevant for the remaining 27 seconds.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When we're faced with an international crisis, it is not an economic opportunity, a business opportunity, and nor is it a political opportunity. It is a responsibility to work together, government and industry, and where possible, government and opposition. And as I've said before, if the opposition has a constructive suggestion to make, I'll listen to it with all ears.
Order. The manager is just seeking a point of order, and it better be because we've go side to side, but it better be not a frivolous point of order, because I want to remind the manager that he's also got the MPI today.
Yeah. Speaker, I seek leave to table the front page of the Australian Financial Review, which has that.
Yeah. That's fine. Of course. That's why I just like to check everything and make sure we're doing it. OK, we'll resume your seat. Yeah, not to hold it up and to use it as a prop, which he did then, to try and get a photograph of him doing that. Order, which is highly disorderly. Order. The Leader of the House.
Leave is not granted.
Leave is not granted. Just reminding the Leader, the Manager of Opposition, one more time that he's got the MPI, and I'm sure he wants the MPI today. Give a call to the honourable member for Aston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Can the Minister update the House on Australia's fuel supply? What actions pose a risk to Australia's fuel security?
Give a call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for the question, and I can inform the member for Aston and the House that our fuel supplies remain in a good position, with 1.56 billion litres of petrol in our minimum stock obligation, 3 billion litres of diesel and 800 million litres of jet fuel, and also that fuel continues to arrive in Australia in the predicted way, the predicted level, and that supply remains to Australia good. I can also report to the House that our 2 refineries are working well. They are responsible for around 20% of the country's fuel demand. And while it would have been better, Mr Speaker, if we had 6, we do have 2, and they are providing a very valuable role as we supply fuel across the country, Mr Speaker. So, as the government has always said, we are not discounting the risks in the market internationally, but we enter this crisis very well prepared, and that is what Australians can be reassured of. We are seeing very big increases in demand, particularly in regional areas. Now, Mr Speaker, let me make it very clear. I understand why Australians would be concerned, particularly if they see misinformation online, and I understand why they may be tempted to buy extra fuel. That is very understandable. But our message to Australians is buy as much fuel as you need, not less, not more, Mr Speaker. That is an important and responsible message that any member of parliament, I think, would be encouraged to deliver. What is not understandable, Mr Speaker, is any Australian who seeks to capitalise on this, and I've seen on Facebook Marketplace people selling jerry cans of fuel at inflated prices. The
Minister will pause, and I'm going to take action against the member for Herbert, who continues to interject non-stop. And he will leave the chamber under 94I. 94I. And the minister is now going to be heard in silence. There's far too much noise in the chamber. Minister in continuation.
Mr Speaker, and I've seen people who can access fuel buying way too much fuel and selling it on Facebook Marketplace and other places, no doubt. I'm sure that is dangerous. As I said yesterday, it's not without risk to fill up jerry cans and sell them online, and it is a risk to the fuel security as well. Now, Mr Speaker, as I said, it's incumbent on all honourable members across the board to send that responsible message. I have seen that the South Australian Liberal leader, who I understand is called, her name is Ashton Hearn, has been heard saying, if I could give you 2 bits of advice, number 1, vote Liberal, and number 2, fill up your tank sooner rather than later. Now, Mr Speaker, I think both of those bits of advice are bad. But the second one is dangerous, Mr Speaker, and irresponsible. And if anybody thinks they want to hold high office in Australia, whether it be at this level of government or the state level, giving advice to panic buy disqualifies them from office in Australia. It is irresponsible, it is wrong, and it is factually incorrect.
Call to the member for Lyne.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Yesterday, the Minister insisted that there is no fuel supply shortage. The Dorney family in Bulahdelah run 2 timber mills. multiple hauling and felling crews and a fleet of logging and freight trucks. In 1 week alone, their daily fuel costs have increased by $7,800. Wow. Their supplier says the problem is not panic buying, but fuel shortages at terminals and rationing between customers. Minister, under your watch, why are Australians like the Dorney family business running out of fuel?
Give a call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. And as we've said consistently this week, we recognise fully that in regional areas in particular there are shortages in particular areas and that the supply chain is under huge pressure as we've seen a massive increase in demand. That has been our consistent position. It remains our consistent position. We've been very clear that no one in the fuel supply chain should seek business or economic benefit out of that. And today the Treasurer and I have worked very closely together with the ACCC to ensure that ACCC penalties are increased for the sorts of behaviour that see people, if anyone is, trying to exploit that situation for their own financial gain. The ACCC will deal with it. But in relation, Mr Speaker, to the honourable member's question, it's also necessary, and I would have thought in the honourable member's, in the interest of her community, for all of us to point out that fuel continues to come into Australia at the expected level, and that our fuel supply stock holdings are good, which they weren't previously.
Order.
I mean, before 2023, when we instituted the minimum stock obligation, whatever holdings we held were in Texas, and we would be in a very difficult position if that was the case. We would be in a difficult position if that was still the case. But the Leader of the Opposition, the member Hume, says absolute nonsense. It's a fact. They were held in Texas while you were the minister, while the member for Hume was the minister. Our fuel supplies were held in Texas. You know that they hold records. You know that they keep the records of these things. The records also show that we now keep the minimum stock obligation in Geelong and Brisbane, and it is accessible if we need to access it, which it wasn't when the member for Hume held my position.
Call to the honourable member for Bonner.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government. How is the Albanese government securing national fuel supplies? Why is working with the transport industry so important at this time? And what can all members of this House do to encourage Australians to use our fuel supplies as they normally would?
Call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Transport, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much. And can I thank the member for Bonner for her question. Her electorate, of course, includes the Lytton refinery, which is doing a lot of heavy lifting to ensure our country is fuel secure. I want to echo the Minister for Climate Change's words, where Australia is fuel secure because of the actions of this government. We take fuel security very seriously, and we also take seriously how critical fuel is in keeping regional communities and the transport sector moving. It's why we have made important decisions that have better prepared us for fuel shock, including the minimum stockholding obligation back in 2022 and ensuring that our 2 refineries remain open. I also want to be very clear that every scheduled delivery of fuel in Australia has arrived here as planned. I know, however, that our Australians are concerned that a significant increase in demand for diesel has seen shortages, particularly in some regional communities. We are seeing some regional service stations struggling to replenish fuel supplies, with demand doubling and even tripling in some areas. I, along with Minister Collins, Minister Ayres and Minister Bowen, met yesterday with both the fuel suppliers, the peak of transport industry, to discuss these issues and to ensure that the key players are working together. And I, in fact, met with Centurion, the largest WA transport provider, this morning. We'll continue to work with industry on how best to manage this, and including I'm meeting with other transport providers tomorrow to ensure continued visibility of this issue. We do continue to have adequate supply of jet fuel, but we do expect that there will be some increase in relation to airfares. We do understand that this is challenging for many people and that people are feeling the impact of higher prices at the bowser. It's why we're taking immediate action to ensure fuel providers aren't taking advantage of the current conflict, and we've charged the ACCC with ensuring there is no price gouging at fuel stations, and also the ACCC already monitors airfares and will continue to do this to ensure that airfares don't unfairly raise their prices. Now, just as this is not a commercial opportunity, it should also not be a political opportunity either. I would ask, and I do so frankly more in hope than in expectation given what we have seen from those opposite, but that we should all be responsible for helping our constituents to recognise that consistent supply means we should all continue to purchase fuel and use fuel in a measured and consistent way. When elected members and commentators intentionally spread fear in the community, that contributes to panic buying. Those opposites' irresponsibility in this case is there for everybody to see.
Order. When the House comes to order, the member for Grey has the call.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. As I refer to his previous answer and what he said about fuel supply flowing to Kwinana, Kylie from Cadbury runs an earth-moving business and emailed me saying, quote, "My fuel supplier, FuelX, has informed me that they are blocked from accessing fuel out of Kwinana and cannot tell me when they will get more." Minister, can you advise how long until Kylie will be waiting to get fuel, Minister?
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Order. The Minister has the call.
Well, Mr Speaker, I did refer to fuel being delivered to Kwinana because it has been. But the honourable member raises a question on behalf of a business. If the honourable member wants to provide me with the details of that, I will make inquiries on the behalf of that business and see what can be arranged for that business and check the situation with her fuel supplier. Honourable members should know. I invited honourable members opposite to come and see me yesterday with any issues they wanted to discuss.
Order.
One did, and I welcomed their visit. We had a good confidential discussion about the issues, and I'm happy to do that with any honourable member. One member visited me to discuss the issues in their region, and I very much welcomed their visit. And any honourable member is welcome to raise issues with me in good faith, and they will be dealt with in good faith. And we'll continue to work with the industry, Mr Speaker. And I refer the honourable members asked what's going on. I refer the honourable members to a statement by the Australian Institute of Petroleum just before question time, which said over the last week AIP members have been hit by a sudden rush to buy fuel. In some cases, suppliers have seen bulk fuel customers buying 4 times their usual volume of fuel. The rush to buy fuel has been unprecedented, outstripping the surge at the outbreak of the Russo-Ukrainian war in 2022. And they're just the facts, Mr Speaker. But what we'll continue to do is work with all the necessary parties across the board. We yesterday held a roundtable for relevant senior ministers with the key groups, including the National Farmers Federation, who very genuinely represent the interests of farmers, and the President of the National Farmers Federation, Hamish McIntyre, has said there's been an increased demand by around 40% right across the nation. The stock of fuel is still flowing. We're comfortable with that, as Minister Bowen has advised us. We just have to slow down demand across Australia, Mr Speaker. He went on to say, I feel obliged to tell the House, it's great to see that the minister's taken this initiative with all the sectors involved right across the transport industry. We're working together to make sure there's a fair and even distribution of it.
The minister was reading a quote. He's being directly relevant. In light of my earlier decisions, this is highly risky for the manager. On a point of order.
Irrelevant Speaker.
Resume your seat. Simply can't use that standing order to interrupt and to. The minister is reading a quote out about a question he was asked. Order. Order. It is highly disorderly. The minister in continuation and will be heard in silence.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. we're quoting the National Farmers Federation and the work we're doing for people represented by the honourable member and people right across rural Australia, because that's the approach this government takes. Dealing with a difficult situation, dealing with an international crisis, dealing with a huge spike in demand, working together across the sectors to take whatever action is necessary. That's what we'll continue to do. If those opposite choose to use an international crisis as a political opportunity, it says more about them than us.
Call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Treasurer. How will the Albanese Labor government's new legislation make Australia's superannuation system fairer and more sustainable? How does this compare to other approaches?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Speaker. I thank the member for Reid for her question, but also for the really important role that she has played in ensuring that thousands of workers in her community will get more superannuation because of this government. And that's because our plan to make superannuation fairer from top to bottom is now law. It passed the Senate last night. Super is a force for good in our economy. It's an important source of security for the working people of this country. And last night this government made it stronger and fairer. Already we've delivered the 12% super guarantee and we're now paying it on paid parental leave. And now we're delivering more super for people with the lowest balances and more sustainable tax breaks for people with the biggest balances. This is an important economic reform with an intergenerational dividend, Mr Speaker. It means 1.3 million Australians will have more super because of our boost to the low-income super tax offset. It means more super for 100,000 sales assistants, more super for 50,000 aged care workers, more super for 7,500 workers in Hume, more super for 7,000 workers in Goldstein, more super for 7,500 workers in Gippsland, more super for 8,500 workers in New England, Mr Speaker. These workers are getting more super despite their local member and not because of him. And that's because the Liberals, Nationals and One Nation all voted for less super for workers, bigger tax breaks for the wealthiest Australians and bigger deficits, Mr Speaker. All three right-wing parties in this place do what the billionaires tell them to do, not what working people need them to do, and we saw that in the Senate again last night. Superannuation is not safe under those opposite. The new leader of the Nationals just last year spoke about taking the super guarantee back down from 12 to 9%. The Shadow Treasurer wrote about dismantling compulsory super for lower and middle income earners, Mr Speaker. This Labor government is delivering more super and more sustainable tax breaks. They are the same old Liberals peddling their extreme right-wing ideology, hacking at wages and hacking at retirement incomes for working people of this country. And now with a Shadow Treasurer who wants to dismantle super and privatise Medicare and end work from home and ditch the dual mandate that asks the RBA to consider its impact on employment. This side of the House is proud of superannuation. We built the thing. We are doing more than protect it from those opposite. We are making it stronger, we are making it fairer, and that's what the new laws deliver.
With the call to the member for New England.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. We have been approached so many times in our offices about what is happening with this fuel issue. It's ridiculous to say that there is not an issue out there. It's patently absurd. So what has been asked of me to ask you is how quickly can we organise a meeting between the independent distributors, the ACCC and yourself. I'm happy to take the Minister for Climate Change as well, if you wish, to address these issues so you can hear from the ground up. They're watching this. They really want to know what your answer is going to be.
With the call to the Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I don't need the member for New England's invitation to consult with the ACCC. We've been doing it through the course of today, Mr Speaker, and the government has made it very clear through the good work of ministers right across our front bench that we are prepared to engage with industry, with regulators and with everyone who has an interest in making sure that we can continue to supply petrol and diesel at fair prices right around the country, Mr Speaker. And in the last hour or so, the Minister Bowen, Assistant Minister Lee and I have made some important announcements about additional steps that we will be taking in this regard. We are taking additional action to help consumers get a fair go at the pump with more scrutiny and surveillance of the fuel sector, bigger penalties for misconduct and action to shore up fuel supply. Now, we have acknowledged that even though there is enough fuel supply in this country, that there are pressures in particular areas, and we've demonstrated a willingness to work with the industry and with the regulators and others to ensure that we fix those issues in the supply chain. We've also made it clear that the conflict—
Well, the Treasurer will pause. The member for New England was asked about a meeting, and the Treasurer has indicated exactly to that part of the question that he's answered. You know, I'm not going to just entertain points of order because people don't like the answer. The member for New England.
It is on relevance. They're listening, wanting to know when can they have this meeting with you.
Well, I think the Treasurer is providing information regarding that timing, or at the beginning of his answer he indicated who he'd been meeting with. The Treasurer has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I also informed the House that the Minister for Energy has been talking with the independent suppliers even today, I think potentially multiple times today, via the work that we have done and the announcements that we have made today. Now, the announcements have three important parts. Firstly, working with industry to increase fuel supply to service stations, including by helping the fuel sector secure ACCC authorisation to coordinate supply and unlock bottlenecks. Also tasking the ACCC to ramp up its surveillance, particularly of unusual price spikes, and also doubling the penalties for false or misleading conduct and cartel behaviour to a maximum of $100 million per offence across the economy. And so the point that I'm making, Mr Speaker, and I say this respectfully to the member for New England, is that we don't need his invitation to engage with the industry. We've been doing that all along, and we've been engaging with the ACCC as well, and that's why we've been able to make this announcement in the last hour or so. Now, as I said before, Mr Speaker, as the others have said, including the Minister, the conflict overseas can't be seen as an excuse to profit off Australians. We are putting the petrol companies on notice. We won't cop big corporates treating Australian consumers like mugs. The steps we're taking today, in addition to the steps we have already taken, is all about getting fairer petrol prices for Australian motorists and more fuel supply at service stations, particularly in regional areas. Now, we have spent a lot of time— I pay tribute to my ministerial colleagues for the work that we have put into this issue, and we've been working through these issues in a methodical and considered way. And as the Transport Minister made it clear before, if those opposite really cared about fuel security, they wouldn't be engaged in the kind of scaremongering which makes things worse rather than better.
Give a call to the honourable member for Hunter.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories. How is the Albanese Labor government improving connectivity for people living in regional, rural and remote Australia? And what other approaches has the government been asked to consider?
Give a call to the Minister for Emergency Management, the Minister for Regional Development, the Minister for Local Government and Territories.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and thanks to the member for Hunter for his question. He knows the importance of connectivity across regional communities. Whether you're in the outback, on the coast or in our mountains, it's completely frustrating when your phone drops out, even doing the most basic of tasks. Improved connectivity not only keeps people in touch with one another, it means safer roads, it means stronger businesses and access to key services. And that's why our government is committed to improving communications in the bush. We're delivering the Better Connectivity Plan, investing $1.1 billion in rural and regional communities, and we're delivering a $3 billion injection to upgrade Australia's remaining fibre-to-the-node network, because we recognise that fast, reliable, affordable internet is an essential building block of any modern economy. And we also want to ensure that the NBN stays in public hands where it belongs. This government is boosting mobile connectivity through Round 8 of the Mobile Black Spot program, including in Cessnock and Coomera in New South Wales, Townsville in Queensland and Mount Barker in South Australia. These upgrades improve connectivity for regional areas that are at risk of natural disasters. And we aren't relying on a colour-coded spreadsheet, unlike those opposite when they were in government. And of course, just last month we announced that we're rolling out AusAlert. AusAlert is a cell broadcast technology to enable authorities to send targeted emergency messages to all compatible mobile devices within a 160-metre radius of an incident. moving Australia to international best practice for emergency warning communications, adopted by more than 35 countries across the world. Mr Speaker, we are improving connectivity through our universal outdoor mobile obligation as well, a significant and important reform to bring mobile services within the universal services framework. Whether it's national parks, hiking trails or out on the farm, we want your connectivity to be accessible. Our Labor government is building the infrastructure and services regional communities rely on. And the biggest risk to this progress is a Liberal national coalition always inventing new ways to take Australia backward, as they did with a copper broadband. Our vision is clear. We want a connected Australia. No matter where you live or what you do, you deserve the ability to connect. And I know that yesterday the former Leader of the Nationals, the member for Maranoa, resigned saying he was buggered. And buggered is exactly what those opposite did when they stuffed the NBN, Inland Rail, the Infrastructure Investment Pipeline, regional grants, the North Sydney Regional Pool, and the list goes on. Unlike those opposite, we are energised and we are excited to be delivering for regional Australia.
Just before the minister resumes her seat, I don't like and appreciate that sort of language used in the House. Order. No. Outside the House, well, I'd have, but inside the House. Give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition in the House of Representatives.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And my question is to the Acting Minister for Defence. The Strait of Hormuz has been closed to shipping since the start of the war in the Middle East. Given that 20% of the world's oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz alongside LNG and alumina, can the minister advise how long he expects military efforts will take until this critical choke point is reopened?
Call. Order. Give the call to the Minister representing the Minister for Defence.
Of course he is. I thank the member for his question, although I point out he's probably directing the question at the wrong person. He's effectively asking me to predict when the conflict between Iran and the United States and Israel will end. And I would submit there's a question best directed to President Trump, the rulers of Iran and the Prime Minister of Israel. In terms of what the broader question went to, which was the potential interruption to our supplies, I can report to the House that as a response to a recommendation of the Defence Strategic Review, we've doubled the fuel holdings for the Australian Defence Force. That's something that should have happened under your watch, which you failed to do. And the latest advice from the Chief of the Defence Force is that our fuel supplies to the ADF, including from the Middle East, are uninterrupted. So instead of scaremongering, they should ask constructive questions at the people who are responsible for these interruptions.
Give the call to the honourable member for Leichhardt.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Resources in Northern Australia. How is the Albanese Labor government building a future made in Australia to create new jobs and boost regional economies? How does this compare to other approaches?
Call to the Minister for Northern Australia and the Minister for Resources.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I want to thank the member for Leichhardt for his question. He knows that a strong North means a strong Australia. The Albanese Labor government is committed to developing Northern Australia because the Labor Party is the only party in this House that truly represents the interests of Northern Australians and indeed the interests of all regional communities right around the country. 24 members of the government, 24 members behind me here today, directly represent regional and remote communities around the country. That's 24. That's many more than the 14 Nationals that we have in this chamber today. And I might add, I might inform the House, take this opportunity to remind everyone that only one member of the Nationals today spoke in favour of the NAIF legislation before the Parliament, and that is the former leader of the Nationals, or one of the three former leaders of the Nationals in this House today. Mr Speaker, the conflict in the Middle East has shown why it's important to build a future made in Australia, to support local industries, to strengthen our national resilience and our supply chains. From day one, the Albanese Labor government has been bolstering Australia's sovereign capability so that the nation can weather these international disruptions. And one of the best examples is this government's support for the Perdaman Urea project in Yakarratha through the Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility. Urea creates the N, the nitrogen, in the famous fertiliser made of nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium. This project is due to start production next year, and in the meantime, as the Ministers for Energy and the Minister for Agriculture has explained, Australia is well supplied for urea. Very importantly, Mr Speaker, the Perdaman project will ensure our farmers have a secure supply of fertiliser to strengthen Australia's food security and the food security of the region. And then there are the jobs. 2,000 jobs in construction for the Perdaman project and 200 ongoing jobs. The NAIF has provided over about $475 million to this project. To Perdaman itself, $222 million, to the Pilbara Ports Authority, $160 million, and to the Water Corp as well. It is the largest project of its kind in the country and the largest manufacturing investment in Australia's history. I'm asked about other alternatives, and I'm asked about the issues they may rise. The answer, the threats to regional Australia are those opposite. As I mentioned before, only one member of the National spoke on the NAIF bill. Another former member, the leader of the National Party, again there's three of them here, that was the member for New England. He urged the new leader of the National Party, Senator Canavan, to push out the member for Capricornia so he can take up his rightful place as the Deputy Prime Minister in this chamber. Have you ever seen such entitlement from a bunch of agrarian socialists? Well, here they all are, three of the former leaders sitting here. We'll get on with the job.
Time has concluded. Call to the honourable member for Kennedy.
Treasurer, 1/10 of our entire export earnings, $62,000 million, boomerangs offshore to buy fuel. Since our question to the Prime Minister last week, truckies, tourism operators, farmers, families are now paying 25 cents a litre more at the Bowser. Since 2005, we've repeatedly moved that 32% of our fuel requirements be met from our own offshore oil reserves. This without even tapping our oil shafts. Brazil, America, Europe all have ethanol, whilst China and India have announced ethanol. Will the budget continue to say no to ethanol for another 30 years?
Call to the Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and to the honourable member for his question. For as long as I've known the member for Kennedy, or known of the member for Kennedy, he's had an interest in fuel security, in particular biofuels, and so I wanted to acknowledge that at the outset, Mr Speaker. I also wanted to assure him that we're not waiting for the next budget to take action on fuel security. The government's taken a number of important steps, including when it comes to our Cleaner Fuels program, to address some of the issues that he raises in his question. And just today, as we've said in earlier answers, we've taken some additional important steps to address fuel security, particularly in regional areas. We do acknowledge that even though there is certainly enough fuel overall, there's pressure in some areas, and so we're working closely with industry and the regulators and others to make sure that where there's pressure on supply chains, that we're working as hard as we can to address them. But just today, Mr Speaker, we're doubling the penalties for retailers doing the wrong thing and others doing the wrong thing. We've got the fuel price monitoring being ramped up for price spikes. We're working with industry to increase fuel supply to service stations, including
Resume your seat. Order. Resume your seat, member for Kennedy. Simply can't get up and say you don't like the answer. You've got to state the point of order. Treasurer.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. And what should be of particular interest to the member for Kennedy is that these three sets of initiatives that we're taking today are on top of a number of fuel security initiatives that we already have in place. For example, and this goes right to the member for Kennedy's question, on the 17th of September 2025, the Energy Minister and I in Brisbane announced the $1.1 billion Cleaner Fuels program to kickstart low-carbon liquid fuel production in Australia, which is all about using our know-how here and our resources here to contribute to fuel security. That Cleaner Fuels program is all about low-carbon liquid fuels along some of the lines that the member for Kennedy has talked about before. But we've also got the domestic reserves through the minimum stockholding obligation that commenced in July of 2023. We're maintaining our domestic refining capability through the Fuel Security Services payment. Again, goes directly to the member for Kennedy's question, remembering we had 6 refineries at the start of the member for Hume's time as Energy Minister. We've now got 2, but we've taken steps to secure our supply. We're reviewing the relevant legislation. We passed legislation in December to strengthen our response capabilities as well, Mr Speaker. So this government understands the pressures on fuel security. We've taken a number of steps, including trying to rebuild and build our own local supply capacity and manufacturing capacity when it comes to low-carbon liquid fuels. And if other steps are required, obviously we'll consider them in the usual responsible way.
Call to the honourable member for Chisholm.
Thank you so much, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government working to deliver better health outcomes for Australian women? Why is the government so committed to investing in the health of Australia's women after a decade of cuts and neglect?
The call to the Minister for Health and Ageing, the Minister for Disability and the National Disability Insurance Scheme.
Thank you, Speaker, and to the member for Chisholm. She's one of 69 women who sit in the government party room. One of 50 women who sit on this side of the House of Representatives, compared to 5 Liberal Party women who sit on that side of the House of Reps. There are twice as many women who sit on this side whose names start with A as there are Liberal Party women on that side of the House overall. And I can tell you, Mr Speaker, every single one of my female colleagues reminds me regularly you cannot be serious about strengthening Medicare without strengthening women's health, Mr Speaker, because women, of course, consume about 60% of the nation's health services, often not because they're sick but because they're women, taking responsibility for their own and their family's reproductive health and reproductive planning, or because they're going through menopause or perimenopause. And the truth is, Mr Speaker, that women have not been getting the support from our healthcare system for decades that they deserve and they need. This morning I want to pay tribute to the Assistant Minister for Health, who made a statement to update the House on our progress in this area and other areas relevant to her responsibilities in the women's portfolio. And I thank her for her tireless work in this area, Mr Speaker, because last year the government added the first new contraceptive pills, the first new menopause hormone treatments and the first new endometriosis medicines to the PBS for literally decades, Mr Speaker. And since then, almost 400,000 women have been able to access their menopause hormone treatments at affordable PBS prices instead of having to pay top dollar. One of those women, Anne, recently messaged me and told me that she was saving more than $600 a year because of that listing, Mr Speaker. More than 300,000 women are accessing their oral contraceptive pills at PBS prices. And we didn't just modernise the PBS, Mr Speaker, in this respect. We've added new MBS or Medicare entitlements as well. Almost 80,000 women just since July have accessed the new comprehensive menopause health assessment. Women are benefiting from higher rebates for complex gynaecological care, and larger Medicare payments now mean that women can access implants and contraceptive IUDs free of charge instead of paying up to $400, which is what they were doing before last year, Mr Speaker. This package is focused on providing women with more choice, with lower costs and with better care, and it is already making a huge difference, Mr Speaker, righting the wrongs of decades, frankly, in too many areas, and delivering a stronger Medicare for Australia's women.
Call to the member for Groom.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Fuel supplier Transwest has told the Courier Mail, quote, "We currently have zero petrol supply at Newcastle and Brisbane. This means that once our servos run out of petrol, that's it, there's no more. Can the Minister assure Transwest that there are no fuel supply shortages in Australia?"
Call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I can certainly assure Transwest and ensure the House and ensure every Australian that our fuel supplies are secure, with more fuel coming to Australia every day, Mr Speaker. I can assure Transwest and assure the member for Groom that 18 vessels have arrived this month to unload fuel and crude oil in Australia, and 33 more vessels are on the water and scheduled for the rest of the month, and the chief executives I've spoken to have assured me there is absolutely no reason to suspect that they won't arrive on time and as expected, Mr Speaker. I can also inform Transwest and the House that our minimum stock obligation, which this government put in place to be held in Australia for Australians at times of crisis, is in place, with 3 billion litres of diesel and 1.5 billion litres of petrol in place that will be called upon as necessary. I can also inform Transwest and the House that we are seeing increased demand. I think the honourable member referred to the Newcastle and Brisbane terminals. Demand at the Newcastle terminal is up 136%, and demand, Mr Speaker, at the Brisbane terminal is up 115%. That will put pressure on supply. It will when that happens. Doesn't matter, Mr Speaker, to be fair, who's in office at that time. When you see doubling of demand, it's going to cause some pressures on supply in the short term. But nationally, our stocks are good. We are working cooperatively with the industry to ensure that it is delivered to the regions that are experiencing shortages as quickly and as efficiently as possible, with the supply chain constraints that are in place, with the transport restrictions, natural restrictions of the size of the transport industry that are in place, and that work will continue, and we'll work with anybody of good faith with any good ideas. I'm yet to hear one from the opposition.
Call to the honourable member for Patterson.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government supporting Australians, and how does the government's leadership differ from that of others? And, Prime Minister, why is consistency of leadership so important?
Call to the Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Order. The member for Goldstein.
I thank the member for Patterson for her very good question. And the government is strengthening Medicare, we're building homes, we're cutting taxes and we're supporting jobs. Yes. And we're dealing with a future made in Australia, which is one of the reasons why we've secured greater fuel reserves, and we're secured by those opposite, and they're secured here in Australia. Now, the surest thing that something important is happening in Australia or in the world is that those opposite turn the spotlight on themselves, Mr Speaker. On the National Day of Mourning for victims of the anti-Semitic Bondi terrorist attack, they announced they were splitting the coalition again. On the day of the funeral of the former member for Higgins, the members for Hume and Canning publicly plotted against their leader. On the day that Israel's president was in Canberra to support grieving members of the Jewish community, the member for Hume resigned and called for a spill. And now, with Australians feeling the impact of war in the Middle East, the Nationals have elbowed their way to centre stage. We're focusing on fuel security for regional communities. They're focused on their front bench security. They have only two settings, Mr Speaker, talking Australia down and tearing each other down. Now, tonight, Australians will be focused on a certain dinner party at Married at First Sight, and they'll experience a bit of deja vu.
Order. The member for Kennedy.
Because there's a range of quotes that Australia has about maths, but is it about them or the coalition? The fights are explosive. The relationships can be toxic. It's typically maintained a certain level of drama that feels catastrophic. And my favourite, it is a bit of a mystery in some ways as to why people are so open and honest on such a public platform, but we're very grateful they are. Mr Speaker, we see them on Sky News talking about themselves. Then they come in here, and they try to engage in political opportunism, no matter what the crisis is that Australians are facing. The fact is, we will continue to govern in the national interest. Those opposite, there'll be a different front bench when we get back here in maybe tomorrow, who knows. Maybe by the time we come back in a week's time, it'll be different again. But one thing One thing it will remain the same. Same old Liberals, same old Nat, same old One Nation, just three right-wing parties not standing up for Australia. And on that note, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.